We're on. Good morning from sunny Sunnyvale, Texas. And I want to say greetings to our brothers and sisters in England, Germany, and Africa. And I want to tell you how much it means to me that you care enough to listen. You know, back in September, I did a teaching at another fellowship about the box. And that teaching was very foundational in the language and terminology that we continue to use as we teach today. The fellowship left it up for a few months, and it was very surprising to me. It had about 500 hits between two different channels. And many people who emailed us referred to the box. Well, that fellowship pulled down a few teachings from David and I, and so the box is no longer available to see. So even though we've been given permission graciously by that fellowship to reuse that teaching, David saw it, really believed it was important to do it again. Again, new, with further revelation. So today we're going to do a teaching. Actually, it's going to be over the next 2 weeks, and as I watch David's eyes get real big, I might ask for 3 weeks over this series. Not so much that I couldn't fit it into 2, but I do not want to make it so cluttered to take away from the simplicity of, for example, of what today is. You know, I am God's reluctant teacher in ministry. I teach that there's the Fourfold Ministry. There's prophets, apostles, evangelists, and pastors. And a man once came to me and he said, "Kurtis, you mean fivefold?" And I said, he says, "Teachers." And I said, "Oh, no, brother. Teaching is what the other 4 ministries do." It always seems to me that I'm very reluctant to teach. It's not something that I feel necessarily comfortable doing. But I am willing to do it for the next 2 to 3 weeks because I believe that this message is so critical and so important that no matter what it requires, I need to speak it. So today, in the next 2 weeks and maybe 3, is titled, let's go to the notes and get the title. Is titled, "The Box, a Tale of Two Identities." This is my box. I want you to know that I am going to take my box before you and reveal everything that I have become in my identity. I'm getting up on my notes here. Hold on, I have to get to the top. I get to my identities. Let's see, let me scroll. Pull up the identity, gender identity, if you could, would you, Jim? Gender identity. I'm going to read the definitions to you and show them on the notes. Is defined as a person's perception of their gender. Facebook now lists 71 gender identities. Last week we knew of 51. In my research this week, there are 71 gender identities on Facebook to choose from. This quote from a 2014 article in the London Telegraph newspaper. UK Facebook users can now choose from one of 71 gender options. By challenging the gender binary, Facebook will finally allow thousands of people to describe themselves as they are now. and it will allow future generations of kids to become truly comfortable in their own skins, ensuring users feel comfortable being their true selves while using the network is a priority. That was said by Simon Milner, Policy Director of the UK, Middle East, and Africa for Facebook. Let's go to identity politics. Now, I'm giving you the three most significant identities that I believe are in the world today. The first, gender identity. The second, identity politics, political identity. It's defined as a person's political positions based on the interests and perspectives with which people identify. Political identities are based on age, religion, social class, culture, ethnicity, race, nationality, political party, sexual orientation, settlement location, and veteran status. This identity is the most fear-driven identity that I know today. Political identification is driven by the fear of what would happen if. What would happen if Trump were elected? We'd be in nuclear war. If Trump's elected, we'll be the laughingstock of the world. If Hillary's elected, we'll just live lies and become socialists. If Hillary's elected, we won't have a conservative Supreme Court. If Trump is elected, we're all going to die. Identity politics is driven by fear. But I want you to know what Paul tells us in Romans 13, 1 through 2, concerning your government. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. Now, you can live in one of two understandings or realities. Either our Father has purposed all governments according to His plan, or the alternate reality is it is all just chaos that surprises even God. You can only have one or two of those ways. For anybody in a democracy, you will be confronted by fear in your political identity. The last is religious identity, defined as one's membership to a religion as it pertains to one's self-concept. Okay? Let's pull it up here, Jim. No, back the camera. What does every definition that I just read have in common? They are all based on a person's self-perception or self-concept of who they believe themselves to be. We read every definition is a perceived self-image and how they want others to perceive them. The authors of the definitions that I just read above do not want and cannot have your self-identity defined as absolute. They cannot have that. And yet, let me tell you this, man was created to have one absolute identity. He was instilled by his Creator with a desire to seek an absolute identity. You were created so that no matter how many identities you pack in this box, you will never be spiritually complete until you are birthed into creation in Christ and become a son of God with the singular identity of Christ. So you ask me today, you say, well, this is just a very complex world, Kurtis. Paul never dealt with these issues. Paul never had to deal with identity issues. He didn't have the political and the religious and the sexual complications of today. Let me read Romans 8, 6 through 8. Actually, let me find that other verse, Jim, before I read that. It is, I think, yeah, right here, Galatians 3:28. Let's go down a little bit. Galatians 3:28, before we get into the other one. Paul says, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free man. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Let's go back and read that. For there is neither Jew nor Greek. That is a religious identity. There is neither slave nor free man. That is a political identity. And there is neither male nor female. That is a gender identity. Paul addresses the three major identities all in Galatians 3:28. And we believe the world is so much more complex than when Paul spoke. Let's go back up in the notes real quick. You ask me, so what is the danger of having a soul flesh box, as we see it, identity? But let me tell you and give you this warning. Every soul flesh identity will imprison you and dictate to you the way that you must think and act. Box identity, a soul flesh identity, will enslave you to your flesh. In Romans 8, 6 through 8, the New American Standard reads, for the mindset on the flesh, the box, is death. But the mindset on the spirit is life and peace. Because the mindset on the flesh, the box, is hostile to God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not even able to do so. And those who are in the flesh, the box, cannot please God. So let's break this down into everyday language in the New International Version. And it says, those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. The ISV says, indeed, those who under the control of human nature, those who are under the control of the box, cannot please God. So, having laid down these identities, let me introduce to you, Jim, pull it up if you could, the diagram that we're going to spend the next 3 weeks going over. This diagram begins, if you're looking, at birth, at conception, I should say, goes to birth, goes through your life to where you meet Christ, and takes you to your death. We're going to draw this out. Let's go to the board. Let's first talk about step one. The first thing you have is your birth. Natural conception. This is where You have your mother's and your father's 23 chromosomes come together. As David has said in the past, that is union. You have union between the father's 23 and the mother's 23, and they come together. That's the first thing that happens. You have union of 23 from each. The second thing that happens is called synapsis, if my research is correct. That's the union of the chromosomes into pairs. The 23 and the 23 become one and become paired. That synapsis is oneness. And then remember, this is all happening at once at the very beginning of your existence. Those chromosomes crossover, called genetic recombination, creates a new identity, a new person. It creates you. At this point, that identity, the Father breathes his wolf spirit into you, and you become a living wolf. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a teaching I have for Facebook group in California. I'm sorry. That's a California teaching. The Father breathes his spirit into you, and you become a living soul. Now, when we get to the new birthing, that's going to be important. Because it's the Spirit of the Father that he gives you. That is your spirit, but it's his. It's on loan to you. Because we're going to read later next week that the body returns to the ground, but the spirit returns to the Father, to the Creator, to God who gave it. This is a living soul. Now, in your diagram, that goes on for 9 months. You are physically arrival to the Father. And this is where I want to pick up. Your arrival to your earthly father. This is where you show up. The first thing you're going to get when you arrive is your birth certificate. In your birth certificate are 3 immediate identities. You have a name given to you by your father upon your arrival. You have a gender, and you have a race. Maybe mixed, but you have a race. I'm Caucasian. Rhonda's black. You're Caucasian. Caucasian. David, you're black. You can't, those are 3 identities that you have to live with. Right out of the box, right out of the chute. I can almost see him going, next. I mean, it's just, there's your identity. From what we do with that is a story of Kurtis's box. At the age of 4, I began to realize that humans needed comfort. We needed something we could find comfort in. I had a pillow. This is my comfort of my youth, my middle adult life, and so I love it. This pillow is 57 years old. That's why it's so thin. I pulled every feather out of this that I could when having to go to bed early at nights. My identity and my comfort. You know, you say, well, that's really nice. Everybody has something they retreat to. Everybody. This pillow is just an example of that. In your life, you will build things into your identity that you will retreat to find security. My pillow is an example. At 4 years old, of that in my life. When I became a fourth grader, my father enrolled me in football. While I only played this for 8 years, it is not what the game did, it's the identity that I brought from it. My father told me, son, there's only two people in the world, those who succeed and those who fail. That's it. The winners and the losers. And in fact, to instill that in me, when I'd go play catch with my father, if I dropped the football, it was over. He'd go in the house. Pick it up tomorrow, son. You dropped the football. This became, at that age, winning and losing, success and failure. Failure became a horrible, horrible word. In the box. You do not fail. Yes, sir. And don't drop the football tomorrow. Yes, sir. I went on to college. I didn't want to fail. I graduated high school salutatorian, got a scholarship to Texas A&M. Failing was not going to be in my vocabulary. I'd have brought a yearbook, but it was too heavy. So I brought my bear. My Texas A&M bear. He's a lot lighter than my yearbook. I graduated A&M in '78. Identity in the box. You say, well, that's not much of an identity. Have you driven down your neighborhood lately? How many flags do you see that say Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma State, LSU, Alabama, Florida? They're coming from all over the world, and they're bringing their identities of their universities and putting them in front of their doors. I go down the street, and all I see in the young people today is their identification of where they went to school. Big, big identification. I'm an Aggie. I'm a Texas A&M Aggie. Will be for my whole life. That's my identity. And lest I forget our first loves in our life, the things that we can never forget, the things we wish we'd have done, we wish we'd have said, the things we wish we could go back and do, our first loves. They affect us. You don't think they do. They affect us. Our first loves affect us. In college, I became a Christian. Yes, I became a Christian. Not just any Christian. I was a Christian. I was a Jesus movement Christian. I was a Jesus movement Christian. Born in the 70s as a new believer Christian. Some of you Christians today, that'll mean something. I was born out of the Jesus movement, which takes us to our next part of our life. Here I am, and let's go to the board. Here I am going through life, and I meet Jesus. Right here. Jesus. In my life. And it was, you have to accept Jesus, blah, 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 the cross, blah, 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 blah. I didn't even hear anything about the cross. All I heard is I need to meet Jesus. So Jesus, this is Kurtis. Kurtis, this is Jesus. Invite him into your life. I did. Me and Jesus right here. I'm a Christian. Me and Jesus. You know what I find interesting about the 71 identities in Facebook is they finally have listed something I can teach about. One of their identities is the two-person identity. Now, 99% of all Christians have to check that box as their spiritual identity. And that's it right here. Me and Jesus. I met Jesus, invited him into my life, the cross. The rest of my box goes from there. Oh, I fell off my stool. I went ahead, graduated A&M as a geologist. Geologist, that's a geo, to rock. Into the box. To be honest with you, I hated geology. My father told me to be a geologist because I could make money. So when I got out of school, I was very glad that I could become a petroleum geologist and look for oil and gas. So now, I'm a petroleum geologist. I have a career. My whole life is ahead of me. Another thing checked off my list. College, a job. I'm a geologist. That means something. I put down on my list occupation, geologist. Petroleum, oil, and gas geologist. Well, on my to-do list was marriage. And I want you to know, being a Christian, I now had a list of boxes to check off. Has to be a Christian, check. Has to love Jesus, check. No sex before marriage, check. And I got married. I had 3 sons in that marriage. 3 sons. 2 of them were very, 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 very difficult. Did I say very? Divorce. I was now confronted with my first failure. My first failure. I had promised myself and my family, I will never leave you as my father did my mother. Never. That was failure on my father's part. I will not do that to you. I purposed that. I purposed that in my heart. I purposed it. I failed. Failure number 1. You know, it's really funny. Failure number 2, I couldn't be an elder. Always wanted to be an elder. Now I'm divorced. Church says you can't be an elder if you're divorced. You have a skin condition. You can't be an elder. I got married again. This time I'm going to do it right. I'm going to marry the opposite kind of person I married the first time. I went down my checklist. Christian, loves Jesus. From that marriage, 2 stepchildren and a daughter. 5 sons and a daughter. Hell has no fury like a daughter. The doctor came out and said, I got good news and bad news for you, Kurtis. The good news is you have a daughter. The bad news is you have a daughter. I was like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I've raised 5 boys. I've got the manual. I've got it highlighted, and the pages are just worn and tattered. I know how to do this. He goes, you have a daughter. Did you not hear me? You have a daughter. You know, Jim, we go to lunch, David and I with Jim. I can write in a 3-hour lunch on a 1-inch by 1-inch sticky note how much Jim says. He doesn't say anything. He just sits there and listens, almost like he's in a coma. And one day I said, why? And I realized it's post-traumatic stress from having raised 2 twin daughters. He's still suffering. He still can't say anything, and they're grown. That's what I come to realize. He's still in post-traumatic stress. Well, as if the daughter, well, let me tell you, the daughter's born at noon. You go through 12 hours and 12 years. Midnight, they become teenagers. If you haven't had a teenage daughter, woo! Let me tell you, they are a new creation of their own. Well, I began to realize that I really didn't manage drama very well. I couldn't control it. I couldn't manage it. So, what else do? You move your mother in with you. Now, I've got 3 generations of women. My mother, my wife, and my daughter. Now, let me tell you what, guys. What about this formula is failure? My mother, my wife, and my daughter. The word is my. If it would have been, if my wife would have said, my husband, my daughter, and my wife, it might have worked. But it was my mother. I began to realize really quickly that what was created was another divorce. My wife came to me and said, I can't do it anymore. My 2 stepsons had graduated high school. They'd moved on. My mother had moved in because she was dying. We had to take care of her. And my wife one day comes to me and says, I just can't do it anymore. And this became my second failure. And let me tell you, as a man once told me, it takes 2 to get married and 1 to get a divorce. But it's still failure. And this became a dream. Because if you thought I had a skin condition on the first divorce, the second divorce, you were diagnosed with full-blown leprosy. I had to go out the back door of my church. I'd walk in and go, you know, brother, this is what I have come to learn. And the brother would go, Kurtis, haven't you been divorced twice? Yeah. I hear my wife calling. I gotta go. Not only could I not be in the leadership, I couldn't even sit people down. They didn't even want me to go witnessing with them. You're a failure. You failed. Why are you divorced twice? Let's get into the political identity. Rhonda, you can't see this. I'm a Republican. Now, that's not bad enough. I'm a conservative Republican. Now, you're going to say, half of you just turned off YouTube right there. Said, that's it, I knew it. But I want you to know, this is a box of identities. This is not who I am today. Some of you are Democrats. You may say, I'm liberal. You may say, I'm more advanced than all of you. I'm a moderate. You may say, I'm a libertarian. It doesn't matter what you say. All of us have these identities in our box. And they are defined by what we fear. Black lives matter because I'm afraid. Blue lives matter because I'm afraid of Black Lives Matter. I took on a new identity that I started to realize. I realized there's power in being a victim. Oh, if I can just be a victim. If I can be a victim, I can use that. Oh, I'm a victim. I'm a victim. I want to be a victim. I want that as an identity. And then somebody came and said, honey, you're a white male. You can't be a victim. I wanted to be a victim. I wanted Be a victim. And I don't want you telling me what I can and can't be. So I'm an angry white male now. Don't you tell me what I can't be. Don't you define my box. I'm angry because I want to be what I want to be, and you aren't going to let me. I'm an angry white male. I'm a conservative Republican, angry white male. Well, about this time, this is what my box looks like. This is my new box. Failure, disappointment. My box is now looking like this. But you know, thank goodness I go to church, because the pastor told me I can clean my box. Jesus, look at that. Last week, he taught on justification, just as if I'd never sinned. Guess that doesn't work, a justification thing. Just as if I'd never sinned. Well, that's what my box looks like. Me and Jesus. He makes me a better me. I've got Jesus cleaner and justified eraser. The Father wasn't finished. If you thought Acts 1 and 2 were bad, wait till you see Act 3. And it all started with probably one of the best things that ever happened was I married Jenny, my wife. This time I didn't have a checklist. I said, Father, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to marry Jenny. I said, well, I've been so good at the last two, I think I'll listen. What I have put that woman through is unbelievable. Now, I do want you to know that when I married Jenny, she was raising a grandson. So I now have my 7th child I'm raising, a grandson. So in life, I'm a father of 6 sons and a father of 1 daughter. I want you to know that it was because of Jenny that I began to understand the mystery. Jenny says, you know, we need to go visit a fellowship that I grew up in her adult age. And I got introduced to Warren Litzman. Jesus lost in the church. In my identity, I'm now a union. I believe in union. I believe in the birthing. I believe in the birthing. I'm a unionized Christian. I'm a better Christian than I used to be because I now am beginning to see the birthing in me. That's right. That's what I thought. I'm just moving up the evolutionary ladder of being a Christian. Still didn't understand identity, but I was beginning to see that something happened in me the day that I believed in Christ and received Him. But the Father was not finished. Shortly after meeting Jenny, the BP oil spill happened. I lost the company that I'd spent 15 years working in. I became unemployed, an offshore oil and gas geologist. Gone. The offshore was dead. Nobody wanted an offshore oil and gas geologist. Can y'all say this with me? Failure. Failure. Divorced twice, unemployed. bankruptcy. Failure. I keep telling Jenny I was going to advertise in a dating service. Overweight, white male, lives with mother, in bankruptcy and unemployed, wants a date. Is there any amazement that this wife of mine, Jenny, even stayed with me? And I want you to know the worst. A doctor comes to me and he says, I got bad news for you, son. What killed your mother is what you have. Pulmonary fibrosis. My brother has it, is waiting for a lung transplant. My mother died of it. And son, I'm sorry to say, that's what you have. And I said, no! And he said, yes. That's what you have. My identity became further failure. Act 3 was getting really bad. And then I met David Kennebrew. Now, those of you who've met David Kennebrew, the first thing you want to do is do this to your box. David Kennebrew will get in your box and walk all around it with his muddy feet. Right? But you know, because I had gone through so much, I wanted to know the truth. This message that we teach is not for the cowardly. You have got to want to know the truth more than anything. It will rock the foundations of everything you think your box is. Every belief you have. Every foundational Christian belief you have. His identity will rock it. And you've got to ask yourself, what do I want more? The world or Jesus Christ? Because your answer to that is the dividing road of what He will reveal to you. All I can tell you is when my daughter left, this is what she left on my desk. A bracelet that says, epic fail. Epic fail. That defines my world. That's my box. No matter how I cleaned it, how I erased it, I was a failure. That's my world. I didn't want this world to exist. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to have family, one wife, children, a job that I could retire with. I wanted to have retirement. I could pull out of my wallet a $1 bill, and that's probably all I have. After 5 years of intermittent work as an oil and gas geologist. All that I could see, no matter how many times I patched my box, no matter how many times I believed that Jesus was going to fix me, fixed who I was, all I could see was failure. And that is my box. It's my life. It's what Kurtis, born in 1956, became. Let's go to the notes. I want you to know what I saw. I want you to know what I saw. I met David. David says, Kurtis, you need to learn I owe you. And I said, believe me, brother, I know I owe you. I owe everybody, including the IRS. He said, no, brother. You need to learn identity, oneness, and union. I said, I don't understand. But it can't get any worse. He said, brother, you need to pray that the Father reveals Christ to you. And one day, months ago, I was taking a walk. In Galatians 2:20, the Father said, do you understand Galatians 2:20? And I said, oh, absolutely. What Christian doesn't? He says, do you understand that I am crucified with Christ? Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God. I said, sure. He said, that's identity. I am crucified with Christ is union. This is me. With the Spirit of God blown into my living soul, this is me. With the Spirit. This is the seed of the Father. You have been birthed. What does this birthing look like? The mother's 23 and the father's 23 come together. Union. The seed of the Son is birthed in you with His Spirit. Union. As this union begins to pair, you become one. One. Synapsis, the fusion of chromosomes, spiritual chromosomes, into, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Oneness. I am crucified with Christ as union. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I. Who's alive? But Christ liveth in me. This creates life, a new life, with the identity of the Son of God. How can it be anything else? If the 23 over here is the Spirit of God, which He breathed into you, and the 23 over here is the seed of Christ, what in the world can result but the identity of the Son and the Father? Jesus said, I and the Father are one. 23, 1. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of. In the King James, of. In the Greek, of. Not in, but of. That is identity. The faith that you now live is the faith of the Son of God. Every Bible scholar has seen this sentence as a statement that associates us with the death of Christ. But note the use by the author, the colons. Everybody doesn't see that. A colon follows independent clauses and are used to join sentences. Paul is diagramming spiritual birthing and spiritual gestation. of his imperishable seed. From union to oneness to identity. Galatians 2:20 is the foundation of that identity. For there can be no union without death. There can be no life without oneness and Christ and the identity of Christ. Have you ever noticed? I want to let's go to the camera here, Jim. Have you ever noticed in Galatians 2:20 that we see death once and life 5 times? Jesus died. You were crucified with him. But he rose to live again because of his identity with and of the Father. Human flesh has no eternal life within itself. John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. In John 5:19 through 21, Jesus said, and we will hear David teach this verse, but sometimes we never see the last line, the last sentence. Therefore Jesus answered was saying to them, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, these things the Son does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself is doing. The Son sees the Father doing them. And the Father will show him greater works than these. And this is what we often whiz right on by. So that you will marvel. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son also gives life to whom he wishes. It was the Son's identity with the Father that resurrected him. It is your identity with the Son that is the power of the resurrection that you now have. Do you see it? Identity is life. It's the power of the resurrection, and it lies in our identity of the Son. The power of the Son's resurrection lay in his identity with the Father. John says in 10:31, I and the Father are one. In John 14:7 through 10 and 20, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. And Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and it's enough for us. And Jesus said to him, Philip, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say to me, Philip, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father is in me? Oh, and this is big. In 20. In that day you will know that I am in the Father, in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. That is the power of the resurrection. Oneness. His oneness with the Father and your oneness with him. That is identity. I get excited. Let me say this before we conclude. If all we see is union, I approached a teacher about identity once. And he said, Kurtis, don't ever say that you are the Son of God. I said, why? He said, because people will misunderstand you and think you're saying that you're Jesus. And I have one thing to say about that. I will not deny my identity because people don't understand. I will not. Because if all I do is live in the birthing and in union, then these four things result. First, we will continue to see ourselves as two people, Jesus and I. It's what I call the two-person gospel. It's the only thing Facebook identity gets right. You can have an identity of two-person. Christian, better check it. Because 99% of you are living, you and Jesus. If all you see is union, then you're going to be two people. The second, when you see you in Christ, your identity is conformed to your box. When you see two people, your identity is conformed to your box. And if you're really lucky, David Canterbury won't get in it. Because if he does, he's going to mess it up. Number 3, if all you see is union, when all that you see is your union, his death, your union with his death, you do not live in the now reality of your resurrection, of his resurrection. You are constantly living in the reality of his death. And you say, well, that's a stretch. No, it is not. How many times you've been told that you need to have a revelation of you on the cross? I have heard this so many times, I'm sick of it. I'm telling you today, you need to have a revelation of you resurrected. We have missed that every time Paul mentions death, he follows with life. Jesus said, I am. My identity is the way, the truth, and the life. That's my identity. The reality of the resurrection is now. It's today. Our union with Christ in death is but a means to an end. The end is life. His life. That's the end. He mentions death once and life 5 times. When developing embryos do not develop beyond union, which is the union of the 46, 23 of the mother and 23 of the father, the embryo cannot develop into a complete or perfect fetus. That fetus will never realize its intended identity. As we go through this series, I want you to remember those words, perfect and complete. Without identity, without oneness and identity, that fetus will never be perfect and complete. I want to end this today. We haven't even gone through all the notes. Jim, let's go to the conclusion if we could. I want to conclude today with this. I want to keep this simple. Because in this simplicity is so much revelation. Next week, and hopefully at the week after, we'll conclude this identity, the box, a tale of 2 identities. I've shown you the first identity. So let me conclude with this. Jim, would you pull it up? Okay, thanks. Let me go down to it. For 40 years, all I heard when I was alone and quiet was the tone of every transgression and every failure in my life. That's all I heard when I was quiet. You failed. You're a sinner. I don't want to hear it anymore. But 2 years ago, I began to hear a new song. The new song of Christ's identity. It began as a quiet and distant tune. I didn't hear it very well. But this new song has become the sound of a symphony and the roar of a waterfall. David sang in Psalm 42:7, "Deep calls to deep at the sound of your waterfalls. All your breakers and your waves have rolled over me." The depth of the revelation of the riches of God's glorious mystery, which is Christ in me. The hope of glory began to sing to the depths of my being and began to roll over me like the waves of the ocean. But I'm going to tell you this, and I cannot say this strongly enough. Why? Why do you continue to attend a church where Sunday after Sunday, week after week, month after month, all you hear is a salvation message and stories out of the Old Testament? You are starving. You're starving. You don't even know it. You cannot become a mature and complete man on milk. Do you not desire the meat of Christ's identity? Let me tell you what. It'll cost you everything. It'll cost you to fail in your box. But I want you to know, I bring you today this hope, this reality. You no longer have to live in the shallow identities that you have stuffed in your box. You no longer have to listen to the fears and accusations of the enemy or squalor in every failure of your past. You have been living with the pigs too long. Your true identity and your inheritance is Christ. You have been crucified with Him, and the life that you now live is Christ. Your slate is clean, and your identity is now a son of God. Walk away from your box and your identity's in the box, and be the son that you were predestined to become. One identity, His Son, the Son of God. Period. And we will wrap it up today. We didn't even get 2/3 of the way through the notes. But I want this to stand. You do not have to live with the pigs. That is not your identity. You have the inheritance and the identity of the Son of God. Amen. Next week, part 2, we're going to go into identity, the new creation, your identity as the Son of God. And we'll pick up this chart where we left off. May God bless you, and may the Father reveal this mystery to you. Amen.